It is highly unusual in Jewish genealogies to list women. Yet Matthew, a very Jewish figure of the New Testament, mentions 4 women in Jesus' genealogy. 3 of them are Gentiles. Through these women and the Old Testament scriptures in which they appear, we see that presented into the bloodline of Jesus is quite a set of sordid circumstances. Prostitution through Rahab and Tamar, incest through stories of Tamar and Judah, adultery, treachery, and murder with the stories of David and Bathsheba, Gentile blood through Ruth, which, by the way, was tainted and racially despised at the time, and last but certainly not least with Mary, teenage pregnancy outside of wedlock. All of these unlikely events had to transpire in order to give rise to the birth of Jesus, the hope of humankind. So Matthew's focus is on the obstacles to birth and how they were overcome. The conflict and the fear, the politics and the ingenuity, all surrounding the birth of Jesus. But despite all of these circumstances, this was the birth of hope. Now, the stories of our congregation are just as incredible, although maybe not as sordid. Chance meetings, planned events, babies conceived during the ice storm, or born in the middle of a tornado, some born at home and others in the hospital, some with drugs, some without drugs and 10 plus pounds. Man, sorry. C-sections, and naturally, we include as a group children born in other countries with excruciating waiting periods for the parents, and some born in other states with little time to prepare at all. But all, in essence, miracles. Now in Luke, we find a very different telling of the birth of Jesus. This version of Jesus' birth story focuses on the miracle. Luke is about the Holy Spirit at work. Jesus in Luke is not the Son of Man, as he was in Matthew. It's not his heritage that matters. Instead, Jesus is the Son of God and the Son of Mary. In Luke, the focus is not on King Herod and the chief priests and the scribes, but on Mary and Elizabeth and the poor and the aged. Luke's focus is not on the obstacles of birth as it was in Matthew. Luke wants us to see the joy, the glory. Luke's emphasis is not on royalty, but on poverty and humility. So whether or not you prefer Matthew's versions of obstacles or Luke's version of joy, the Christmas story reminds us of the miracle of birth and the miracle of life. And the Christmas story reminds us of the importance of family. Some chosen and some that may have chosen us. And the best thing about Christmas is getting together with family. And the worst thing about Christmas my mother is in the back row. So I'm not going to finish that sentence. I'm not talking about our family, of course, Mom, because, I've just heard about other families that these things happen. I like to spend time with my mom. We do still have a 3-day rule. Y'all know about the 3-day rule? Yes. Thank you. It's healthy, isn't it? It is healthy. Because after 3 days, you know what happens? Yes. Fish starts to smell after 3 days. You don't want to eat anything if it's been sitting around for more than 3 days. Sorry. The thing to remember, though, is during this Christmas season is that even difficult people are easier to embrace when we remember that at some point everyone was a miracle. Everyone was a miracle. Christmas reminds us of the miracle of birth, everyone's birth. We were all once little miracles who would stare wide-eyed in wonder at the newness of every single experience, who would make someone smile just by clasping a finger with our tiny little hands. Happiness has gotten a little more complicated since then. But probably, to no one's surprise, my own birth story includes an enormous amount of planning. You see, I was conceived in November, 9 months and a couple of weeks before my father was to be released from the Navy. So it was the month I had to be conceived in order to be born at the Naval Hospital in California. There was it had to be that way. My mom says that everything was very sterile and kind of gruff at the Naval Hospital. She was only 20 and my father was 21. I just cannot even imagine that right now. I was an idiot at 20. I should not have been having any babies at 20. Whew. Even though my father was on staff at the Naval Hospital, he was not allowed to attend any birth, my birth at all. Things have changed tremendously since then. My mother got an epidural after I was already beginning to crown, so she didn't actually feel the birth itself. I was cleaned up and showed to her really briefly and then whisked away to the nursery. So the first time that she was able to hold me was the next day. She wheeled down to the nursery entirely dressed in pink from head to toe. When she gave the nurse my name, the nurse came back and was about to hand her the baby when she said, "Now be careful, the baby will be a little sore for a while." It was at this point in the story when I was waiting for my mother to tell me that I had been dropped on my head as a child or something. But instead, my mom tells me that she was baffled too, and she said, "Why will my baby be sore?" The nurse said, "Well, because he was circumcised this morning." She went, "I had a girl." Whoops. So I eventually was brought to my mom, and the rest is history, although that story could have been really different. We've got wristbands and electronic data, all kinds of things now. That's not ever happening anymore. It is easy to see little babies as the miracles that they are. It is more difficult, though, to remember that as adults, it's much more difficult to remember as adults, that we too are little miracles. Grown-up little miracles. Look at all these babies out here. It is easier to see babies as children of God. It becomes more difficult to translate that feeling of wonder and awe of life to those with whom we have a difficult relationship. But this church is a great place to practice that, to imagine everyone in your presence as a beautiful, awe-inspired child of God.